Hello and welcome everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us today for our webinar, The Wild Wild World of Scams, which is being hosted by Iris, powered by Generali. I'm personally really excited to have you all join us for what I expect to be a highly engaging and educational discussion on crazy scams and reducing your risks of becoming a victim. I'm Eugenia Blackstone and I'll be the moderator for today's event. I'm proud to be the Chief Marketing Officer at Iris, powered by Generali, which is the trusted identity and cyber protection partner to many Fortune 500 companies. At Iris, we specialize in providing people-first technology-forward solutions that are customized to fit a company's brand and goals, creating a seamless experience that adds real value, to their customers. And as a leading provider of identity and cyber protection services, we're passionate about staying at the forefront of ways consumers are being victimized and developing solutions and educational forums, such as our webinar today, to reduce those risks. If you haven't already, we encourage you to visit our website, irisidentityprotection.com, to learn more about our identity and personal cyber protection solutions, like Scam Assist, a brandable digital submission tool that allows you to submit suspicious emails for review, and as well as access additional resources related to reducing your risk of being scammed. So very quickly, before we dive into the webinar, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. First, questions are welcome. So please type them into the question box and we will address them as we go throughout the webinar and also during the question and answer period. Also, if you have additional questions after the webinar that we're unable to get to, we have a lot of people on the call today, which I'm really excited about. We will have our contact information at the screen at the end of today's session, and you can ask those questions there, or we'll get back to you through that contact information. Finally, the webinar is being recorded, so sit back, relax, enjoy the webinar. Don't feel the need to take furious notes. A link to the recording will be provided to all the participants after the session. So with that, let me give a brief introduction to our speakers and then we can get the show on the road. First, we have Steve Weisman. Steve is a lawyer, college professor at Bentley University, and editor of Scamicide.com, where he provides daily updates about the latest scams and identity theft schemes. Scamicide.com was named by the New York Times as one of the 3 best sources of information about coronavirus-related scams. Steve has also authored 10 books, including The Truth About Avoiding Scams, which was chosen as one of the top 10 business books of the year by Smart Money magazine. Steve has also appeared as an expert on various news networks and talk radio shows, and was a talk radio host in Boston, where he co-hosted the nationally syndicated radio show A Touch of Gray, and was awarded an Achievement in Radio Award as the best afternoon radio show in Boston for his radio show Live Money with Steve and Ginger. Steve is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts and Boston College Law School, and a member of the Massachusetts Bar and Federal Bar, and is admitted to practice before the United States Supreme Court. We're super excited to have Steve on our panel. Welcome, Steve.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. Steve is also joined by Joseph Villa, who manages Iris's global solution and training support. Joseph began his career at the company as a certified resolution specialist, in which he assisted thousands of identity theft victims resolve a wide variety of identity theft incidents, including advising, placing various safeguards, as well as initiating formal disputes with creditors and the 3 major credit bureaus. Prior to his current position, Joseph managed a team of ID theft coordinators and certified resolution specialists at Iris, striving to provide the highest possible level of assistance to Iris's end customers, including working with end customers to resolve identity theft incidents and providing educational resources before an adverse event occurs. In his current role, Steve leverages his vast resolution and customer service experience to help the company deliver quality training to Iris Resolution Center employees, including topics focused on Iris's products and services, general customer service and administration as well. Thanks for joining us, Joseph.
Thank you, Eugenia.
Thank you. So to kick us off and set the stage for our live audience, let's open the conversation up with a poll. So for the audience, have you ever personally received a scam message or solicitation online, in the mail, or by phone? So we're going to leave the poll open for 30, 45 seconds or so. So please go ahead and respond to that question. in the meantime, while we're waiting on those responses to come in, excuse me, I know that I've personally received a good deal of these. I do on a daily basis, unfortunately. And just because of the nature of my role, I'm keenly aware of this. And so I know that there are scams. I know that, that they're being sent to me for some malicious purpose, not the intent that they're purported to be coming in as. So not surprisingly, 100%, everyone else has too. So that doesn't surprise me at all. And so related to that, it makes me want to share just a few relevant stats around the scam and identity fraud landscape. According to recent research, in 2022, 25 million Americans lost $23 billion to scams. Every year, millions of American consumers fall victims to scams, leading to financial loss, emotional damage, and oftentimes identity theft and fraud. So in today's webinar, our panel will explore some of the common and wild scam stories and provide our audience with some tips to help you all recognize a scam and give you resources in case you become a victim. So Steve, I believe you're going to kick us off by sharing some common and not so common scam stories with us. So while you take it away, I'm going to have a quick drink of water so I can stop fluttering over my words.
Good. All right. It's interesting because one of the things when I was thinking about seeing that poll, it reminded me of a statement that former FBI Director James Comey once said. He said, there are two kinds of businesses in the United States. He said, there are those who have been hacked by the Chinese, and there are those that don't know they've been hacked by the Chinese. So yeah, we are all susceptible to these things. What's a scam? Fraudulent, deceitful scheme to steal your money. And frankly, as long as there have been people, there have been scammers. Scam artists, they're the only criminals we refer to as artists. And they have a knowledge of psychology that Freud would have envied. And as time has gone by, the technological advances have enabled them to reach more and more people. Looking back as far as historically, one of the early scammers of the 20th century with which we're all familiar is Charles Ponzi, creator of the Ponzi scheme. However, this is blatant sex discrimination. Ponzi did not invent the Ponzi scheme. A woman named Sarah Howe, also in Boston, I don't know what about it, Ponzi was from Boston, invented the Ponzi scheme as well as affinity fraud. The Ponzi scheme is essentially you have an investment, but there is no investment. You're paying off old investors with the money that come in from the new investors, and there's nothing there. And Sarah Howe, what she did was she started and this was in the late 1800s, the women's only bank. Women didn't have much access to funds or management, and certainly weren't treated with respect as far as that. So here was a woman who started a bank, but she was having strict controls that the women were limited as to when they could get their money back. Of course, it was all a scam, and it also points out a typical scam, which is affinity fraud. And the thing is, we trust people who are like us. Who's like us? Well, it depends on what kind of identification you make. So for instance, with Sarah Howe, women trusted her because she was a woman. There was a Ponzi schemer in Boston, Brad Blight, who cheated, among others, members of the Masons and Mason chapters. And so many of them were concerned with how could a fellow Mason scam us? And that's one of the things when it comes to fraud. My motto is trust me, you can't trust anyone. Of course, one of the most common scams is identity theft, which can be high tech, low tech, or no tech. It can cost you money, or it even can cost you your life, because when it comes to medical identity theft, and your medical insurance is something that on the dark web, when criminals steal that and sell that, is the most expensive. So with medical identity theft, somebody is getting your medical insurance information, going to be accessing your medical insurance, but unfortunately, their medical records are going to get interspersed with yours. And the HIPAA rules are such that even if you find out that someone is using your medical insurance and also having their medical information mixed in with your medical records, you can't have it removed because it would violate the privacy of the scammer. Okay, we'll figure that one out sometime. Bottom line is, it's a really big concern. And most of us, when we get our medical insurance bill, we usually, and it's called an EOB, explanation of benefits. We'll go down to the bottom right-hand corner because it's confusing and see, do we have to pay anything? If we don't, then we kind of ignore it. But you got to really pay attention because that's the first indication of medical identity theft. Scams and identity theft have become big international business. The Interpol once said there are only about 100 cyber criminal geniuses. I call them the Lex Luthors. But what they do is, their business model now is that they create the malware and delivery systems. They sell them on the dark web, that part of the internet that criminals buy and sell goods and services. And less sophisticated criminals are able to use them, which just makes us more and more vulnerable. So who's in danger of being scammed? Well, seniors certainly are. And we seniors have a bit of an excuse. There have been some studies done at Cornell University and the University of Iowa that have shown that there's a part of our brain that deals with skepticism. And as we age, it becomes less viable. So seniors are more trusting. But interestingly enough, the second largest group is millennials. And millennials often are the victims of scams and identity theft. But anyone can be a victim of identity theft. Studies have shown that intelligent people, sophisticated people are often the victims of investment scams. But things aren't as bad as you think. They are far worse. So let's go to the next slide and see some of the places we're getting scammed. Phishing is one of the biggest things. Phishing, smishing, and vishing. Oh my. Sounds like we're in the Wizard of Oz. Phishing are emails that lure you into providing personal information or clicking on links or attachments with malware. And this is one of the things where the biggest source of data breaches. And you got to remember here, we are only as safe as the places with the weakest security that have our information. So phishing emails, they look like they're from someone you trust. You click on a link, you download an attachment, and malware comes onto your computer, which can be ransomware, it can be keystroke logging malware, stealing information, making a victim, identity theft. And the thing is with that, it looks legitimate, and that sometimes it may not. Sometimes the email address is way out of line. I'm supposed to be getting something from Vanguard, and it comes from someone at a college in Texas. Why? Because the bad guys, what they've done is they use botnets. They use networks of zombie computers they've infected to send this out. But a lot of times, the phishing email will really look good, including one of the things I've found most unusual is homograph attacks. And this is using the Cyrillic alphabet, which is used by Slavic-speaking people. This is substituted for the Roman alphabet. So the letter A may be slightly different. And so you're looking quickly, or even not so quickly, at an email address, and it looks like it's really coming from the bad guys. One of the things here is, oh, I've got good security software, so I'm not going to worry about clicking on that link and downloading the malware. Problem is that the most sophisticated security software is always going to be at least a month behind the most zero-day defects. These are the newest defects. So it takes a while to catch up, which is also a reason why it's very important when the new updates and security updates come and patches that you install them right away. The major data breach at Equifax was caused by Equifax being late in downloading a security patch for some software. It was called Apache that they used. Smishing are text message scams, and text message scams are now even more prevalent than phone scams, and vishing, phone scams. And one of the things when you get a call on the phone, once again, when you get an email, a text message, or a phone message, you can never be sure who's really calling you or contacting you. Because on the phone, there's this easy technique called spoofing will allow the scammer to be able to make it appear on your caller ID as if the call was coming from someone else, looking like the IRS, which is, how do you know if it's the IRS calling you? And there's an easy way to know. The IRS doesn't call you. They contact you with good old snail mail. So if you get an email, a text message, or a phone call from the IRS, it isn't. Robocalls are a huge problem, and many of these originate outside the country using computer voice over internet protocol. And the FTC has really been doing actually a pretty good job against companies who are providing the voice over internet services to overseas scammers. But these robocalls are a real problem, and there are services that will limit it. Sometimes they just tell people, don't answer the phone if you don't recognize the number, and just wait for it to leave a message. Tech support scams are huge, and one of the most common is you open with a pop-up on your computer telling you there's a problem, and there'll be a phone number for you to call and give that. And often when you call, they will ask for even remote control over your computer. This can lead to all kinds of problems. Here again, the thing is, your Microsoft, Apple, they're not going to have pop-ups telling you that there is a problem on your computer, and they're not going to call you on the phone and tell you this. Another issue is for tech support, and this one's particularly insidious, is maybe you need some tech support with your Microsoft product or your Apple product. And so where do you go? You Google it. You go to a search engine, you put in tech support for Microsoft, for Twitter, for whatever, and up comes the search engine, and at the top is your tech support. Well, first of all, there are some companies that we use that don't even have phone tech support, and so the scammers will put sometimes they'll even pay for the ad, other times they're smart enough to manipulate the algorithm so they'll turn up high, and you end up calling the scammer right away. Of course, one way to know it's a scammer is they're really good at answering the phone when you call for tech support. There was recently a PayPal phishing scam, and they had a phone number there. And if you call, boy, the scammers, they answer right away. If you call the real PayPal, press 1 if you want this, press 2 if you want that. So the scammers do provide pretty good support. Lottery scams is a scam that has really become a huge thing, particularly with seniors. One of the most common one of these is the Jamaican lottery scam. And here's the thing, it is difficult, telling you something you don't know, difficult to win a lottery. It is really hard to win a lottery that you've never entered. And so when you get a call that you have won the Jamaican lottery or any kind of a lottery, one of the most, again, difficult ones is a lot of people play Publishers Clearinghouse, and when they get a phone call from them telling them that they've won, they believe it. But here's where the scam comes in. You've won all this money, but you have to pay income taxes to us before we can release the money, or there are some administration fees before we can release the money. The thing here is, with the best of scams, or the most effective scams, we'll say, not best, there's always a kernel of truth. So you do owe income taxes on lottery winnings, but no lottery collects that from you. So if you win megabucks, they're going to deduct it from your winnings. Other lotteries may pay you the winnings and you pay it, but no lottery will ask for you to pay them taxes, and no legitimate lottery asks for fees afterwards. Romance scams, you know, this has been something that's sadly more and more prevalent, and a lot of people fall for this. They go online to various dating sites or other social media. They develop relationships with people online. Often it's people who purport to be overseas. You develop that loving relationship, and then they start asking for money. There's some kind of an emergency and they need it. Or interestingly enough, a flip side of that is they may turn you into a money mule, an accessory after the fact on a crime. Suddenly they're saying, you know what, I'm going to wire you some money and I need you to wire it somewhere else. Well, what they're doing is launder the money. Or I'm going to have, for some reason, I'm going to have some computers or phones sent to your home, and then you package those and send them somewhere else. So the big thing here is you got to be aware. You got to be aware that no one is going to fall in love that immediately and ask for money. That's going to always be a problem. Peer-to-peer payment scams is an interesting one, and a lot of people will use Venmo and Zelle. The problem is, this is like wiring money, and the bad guys love wiring money and they love gift cards. Because one of the things here with wiring money and gift cards is the money's gone and it's gone. It's not like paying with a credit card where it could be stopped and come back. So Zelle and Venmo is pretty much the same thing, and it shouldn't be used except for people that you know, there are friends. But the scammers will ask you to send money through Zelle or Venmo. And here's the thing, interestingly enough, if your Zelle account or your Venmo account is hacked, you're not responsible. But if you fall for a scam and send money through Zelle or Venmo, you are responsible. Now, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and Senator Elizabeth Warren have been trying to put into effect new regulations to protect consumers, but we're not there yet. Income tax identity theft. This is another huge one, multi-billion dollars. And what happens is the criminals will get your social security number and they will file an income tax return with a counterfeit W-2 and get a refund before you get a chance to file your tax return. You file your tax return and the next thing you're told is we already have a tax return, and it can take the IRS as much as a year to get you back your money. So here's the way around this. One is file as early as possible, because if you file before the criminal does, you're going to be okay. The other thing is the IRS now has a PIN program, and they should probably advertise this more, where you can get from the IRS very simply online each year a PIN to include with your income tax return, so that even if the criminal has your social security number, they're not going to be able to file an income tax return in your name. By the way, let's put a positive spin on income tax identity theft. A lot of violent gangs have gone into the income tax identity theft business because it's more profitable and less dangerous. And street crime in Tampa, Florida has gone down precipitously since many of these gangs have decided to do the income tax identity theft. Let's go on to the next slide. Social media. Social media is something where a lot of scams begin. And one of the things is we often trust what we get on social media because it's coming from friends. But there are times where someone will hack into or clone a Facebook account. I think you've probably all seen it. You get a request for a friend that you're already a friend with. Well, that's not necessarily hacking. It's Facebook cloning. Someone's setting it up so that it appears that the messages you get. Now, the messages you get may be to lure you into some government grant that is non-existent, or they may send you some other cryptocurrency investment. The bottom line is we're going to trust people when we get this from social media. The other thing is we're often our own worst enemies. Years ago, there was a cartoon character, Pogo, and Pogo wrote, "We have met the enemy and he is us." Some of us put too much information about ourselves on social media, and the scammers, the criminals, the bad guys, they are able to gather this, harvest this information, and use it against us. You know, often one of the big scams that we see is the check for more than your own. You'll see this on Facebook Marketplace and other places. You're selling something, they send you a cashier's check, a bank check, and it looks really good. And it's for more than what's owed. They have some kind of excuse, ask you to wire the excess money back to them. I once did a Dr. Phil show where we were looking at one of these checks, and the person said, "I was really careful. I went to my bank and I saw, did I have this in my account? And I saw that it had cleared." But he didn't see it had cleared. What he saw was after a few days, the banks are required to give you provisional credit, which is just a temporary credit. So the money isn't really there. And when the check bounces, the money comes back out of your account. So you never, ever accept a check for more than what is actually owed you. The ATM tap and glue scam. ATMs, you know, why did the bank robber rob the bank? Because that's where the money is. And ATMs have been often targets for scams. And one of the new ones is the scammers will go to the ATM. They will put glue in the slot where you put your card. So you go to put your card in, and you're not able to do it, but your friendly neighborhood scammer happens to be standing nearby and says, "You know what, your card has a chip and a radio tag, so you can just wave the card," and people will do that. But people who, like me, aren't used to using the radio chip for the ATM, may forget and often do to close out. It isn't the way that they usually do their account. So they take their money, they take their card, which has come out, and they go on. And the scammer, your card is still active, it's up there. And the lesson here is when you're on your ATM, first of all, cover so no one can see when you're putting in your PIN. But second of all, always make sure that you're out. Virtual kidnapping. You know, this is something that has come up in recent years. You get a call, a family member has been kidnapped, and now with artificial intelligence, just having very few seconds of someone's voice, which they may get from social media, they may get from YouTube, whatever, they can clone that voice and make it sound like it is your relative who is calling you and has been kidnapped. Interestingly enough, a lot of the virtual kidnapping comes from Mexican prisons it's been traced to. But the bottom line is, for protecting yourself here, you've got to have some kind of like a safe word, a key word that you have within the family so that you know that this is not a real kidnapping. The grandparent scam, and here, this is one again that has gotten worse with AI, but it's the kind of thing where it's a combination of vulnerability. They go after the senior. The senior is, you know, they call late at night. There's an emergency. It's from the grandchild. I'm on vacation in Acapulco. And you know what? The grandchild may be in vacation in Acapulco because they put it up on their social media so that the scammer who's following it can find out that they actually are there. And they may even refer to the grandparent. I used to love the Big Bang Theory and young Sheldon. And young Sheldon refers to his grandmother as Meemaw. So you get the call in the middle of the night, you're a little disoriented, and they say, Meemaw, I need you to help me out. And so it sounds legit. Here again, you've got to slow down and not send money right away. If it's a medical thing, you check with the hospital. If it's a police thing, you check with the police. Or again, you always check with the real person who says they are on a phone. Cryptocurrency scams, they're everywhere. And this was, you know, Bernie Madoff once said he actually had the gall, the chutzpah, to blame his victims. He said, anyone that looked into what I said I was doing would have seen that it was impossible. Fear of missing out. People will invest in cryptocurrencies, and cryptocurrencies can be legitimate, absolutely are legitimate. But there are illegitimate ones, and there are a million scams. So you never should invest in anything unless you really know what it is. One of my favorite things for a warning on cryptocurrencies was Howie Coin. And check this out online, the Howie Coin, HOWEYCOIN website. And it shows you that this has been approved by the SEC, all kinds of endorsements. It's really good. And when you get to the last page to invest, it tells you, guess what? This is the SEC. This whole thing was a scam. Cryptocurrencies, people should be very, very careful about. They also should be careful about their wallets to protect them. It's something no one should get into unless you really know what you're doing. Pig butchering. This came from China. There's actually, pig butchering is the English translation of the Chinese word for that. And it came over the last few years. And with pig butchering, what we have is, it usually starts out with a romance scam. This one is a long term. They really build that relationship. And then after that relationship is built, what they do is they say, you know what, I've got a great investment, and it's generally in cryptocurrencies. People put their money into it and it gets stolen. So they fatten them up, they get them ready to fall for the scam, and then they do. Last thing before we go to another poll, QR codes, the quick response codes. You know, we see these on parking meters in restaurants. The bottom line is what the bad guys do is they will take their own QR code and tape it over a legitimate QR code. So you go, and maybe you're in the restaurant and you're turning your credit card over to the bad guys, or you do it at a parking meter. So you've got to be careful, make sure that that really is the real QR code. So I think it's time probably for that next poll.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. So much good information in there. We could do a whole webinar just with you talking about the different wild scams alone. But we do want to move into our next poll question, because I'd be really interested in knowing from our audience, Which scam types or techniques were you aware of before today's webinar? So we'll give about 30 seconds for folks to respond to that question before we move on. I know, again, by the nature of what we do, I was aware of these, but it would be really interesting to see what everyone else thinks. I think one of the other tips that you gave that I didn't think of but makes a ton of sense, it related to tech support scams, is if they're so eager to answer the phone. I mean, unfortunately, we've gotten used to not the greatest customer service from that sort of stuff. And so you're on hold for quite a while. And so I think that's one I'll keep in mind. If they answer the phone right away and there are no automatic prompts I need to go through, that's probably a good indicator that something's not quite right. So, all right, looking at the results here, it seems like tech support scams and virtual kidnapping were pretty neck and neck on the ones that folks were aware of already, which is not surprising. But pig butchering, less than half of folks were aware of before today's webinar. So really good that we're educating some folks here on some of these newer techniques. So with that, we will move over. Thank you again, Steve, for all of your insights here. And so now that we've heard about some of these wild scams and crazy scams, Joseph, it'd be great if you can share some tips with consumers and businesses on how to help them spot scams so that they don't become a victim.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eugenia. So a lot of information that Steve gave, which was great. As we know, unfortunately, scams are not 100% preventable, but this conversation, we really hope that you guys can get some guidance on how to spot them, how to react if you become a victim, and also have better behaviors going forward. So a few common red flags are scammers will pretend to be from an organization you know. And when I say organization, that's a very broad term. It can be a business that you do business with, a company like PayPal, Amazon that we all frequently use. It can be IRS or Social Security Administration, like Steve mentioned, but they'll hit at that familiarity about that organization. So it's important to be aware, as Steve said, that IRS will never call you. Then they will always say, scammers will always say that there's a problem or a prize. This pushes you to act quickly. For example, we know that when there's a prize involved, we all want something free or a lot of money. And when there's a problem, we all want to fix that problem. Like Steve said, your grandma gets a call. That's a problem for your grandma. Your grandma's going to fall for that problem. So it's important to understand that when there's a problem and a prize, if it's too good to be true, pay attention. Then scammers will pressure you to act immediately. What I mean by this is they usually will say you have 24 hours to win this, or your son is in the hospital, he needs immediate surgery, you need to send this money. So they will pressure to act quickly, saying that if you don't act within the time frame, the offer is gone or the problem gets worse. Then scammers will tell you to pay in specific ways. And this really builds up on what Steve mentioned. There's so many different ways to pay, but always focus on understanding what are secure and what are not secure. It's important to best pay with a credit card because it can be reversed. It's important to never pay with gift cards. Avoid sending checks. So those are usually unsecure ways because when you use the check or the Venmos and the Zelles, it's like a cash transaction. Once you hand that cash over, the cash is not yours anymore. So it's important to understand secure ways of paying. There's also a few, oh, sorry, Eugenia.
Say cryptocurrency is a great example of that as well, which now there are even crypto ATM machines with which people are falling for a lot of scams related to, because there really is no way to get the money back, or it's incredibly difficult to get the money back.
Absolutely, and it's hard to trace. There's not little to no regulation yet on it, so it does become very difficult. And then before we move on to the next one, just want to point out a few usual stressor events building on the common red flags. So they'll claim that transactions need to happen ASAP. Again, that's that pressure. If you don't send this now, you will lose that money. They'll tell you to send it in a check. They'll say cryptocurrency, they'll say gift cards. Please don't fall for those. Then you also have part of the pressure that they'll give you is, and we've noticed them a lot with COVID and certain government benefits. At Iris, we saw a lot of SBA loans. Well, They might be scamming you and say, if you don't pay this back, you're going to prison, or they'll say Social Security Administration. Apparently there's Social Security investigators, and they said, we found your social connected to a drug site or a drug crime. We need you to come down to the office, to the police station, and give this information. So understanding that if you can't be arrested for sending us money, and the Social Security and IRS will never ask you to send it like that. Then they'll prey on our emotions, like saying somebody from your family is hurt. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, I was already at Iris. My grandma got a call, and they were able to tell her very specific details of where I would lived, what had happened to me. But she knew where I worked. She knew that, hey, I should check in with Joseph. So she called me right away, and I told her, no, Grandma, I'm okay. So they'll prey on that emotion of family members and loved ones. They'll also claim that they're in love with you. So it's important to understand that if it's too good to be true, it's usually bad. And that builds on cryptocurrencies as well. So let's move on to the next slide. Now, just a few tips. As Steve mentioned, there's an incredible amount of common scams, and also there's a great amount of crazy, wild scams. There's really no way to identify all of them. With the rise of technology, all these scams are also evolving, developing new methods, and getting better, unfortunately, or not better. I don't like that word for scams, but
More
I guess more
sophisticated.
sophisticated, yes. Another story is we check for scams. It's part of what we do at Iris, and the PayPal invoice scams, or the Norton LifeLock scams, or just these services that they send you an invoice. The invoices are getting better and better or more sophisticated by the day, where it's so hard to differentiate if it's being spoofed or if it's genuinely coming from a legitimate business. So having a careful eye is very important. Now, just a few tips about, generally speaking, when it comes to scams is you need to
Funny,
notice that.
I don't want to cut you off, Joseph, but it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think another piece is that people should not feel uncomfortable with double checking. Now that
Never.
should be the norm now. Uh, a few hours ago, our CEO emailed me and asked me about a link that had come through for a DocuSign. Is this legit or not? And that's the new norm for us. We often check because they've gotten so good that you don't know if it's a legitimate thing or not before you click a link. And I sent her an email back and said, yep, we were expecting that one. That one's legitimate. But I want people to be comfortable with contacting the organization or the purported sender to say, should I be expecting this, or did this really come from you? So I think that's one of the biggest things too, is just starting, unfortunately, but starting from a place of mistrust and verifying it versus just assuming that it's okay if it looks okay.
Absolutely. I agree. It's absolutely okay to be skeptical. It's almost necessary in this day and age. So just a few tips, and they'll build very well on what Eugenia just said, is you want to notice discrepancies in the company name or the sender email. To build up on the examples I've mentioned is when you get an email from Amazon or PayPal, it will most likely be something at paypal.com or no reply at paypal.com. Getting an email from a university, like Steve said, at fsu.edu or it makes absolutely no sense. So being detail oriented at these and looking at these communications, just a little careful, and being more on top of it is going to help you. So make sure to notice those discrepancies. Also, incorrect grammar and typos. And Eugenia and our marketing team can attest to that. We want to be careful when we are a business and a professional company and the way we type our communications. So it wouldn't make sense for a billion-dollar company, a reputable company like Amazon, to send you an invoice with irregular grammar. And now it's not just the big companies. Any professional business will take the time to proofread a communication and tell you, hey, hi, Joseph, we're contacting you. They take the time to really prepare the communication. So be sure to look for those. Now, a few other tips is take a little bit of action. Block unwanted calls and text messages. Register for the do not call registry. We have provided that resource in our presentation, so make sure to take advantage of that. That will also protect you against the robocall scams, as Steve mentioned earlier. They're too good to be true. Hint, it probably is. And that can apply to many different environments, many different types of scams, from winning a prize to an investment to just an offer being too good to be true. Also, stop and talk to somebody you trust. Somebody that might have a little more experience, somebody that might be a little more familiar with the environment, somebody with experience in the financial world, somebody with experience in identity theft. Use those resources. Talk to people that you trust. And I believe we're ready to move on to the next slide, Brittany. So why are we mentioning identity theft best practices? Scams can lead to identity theft and are usually the beginning of identity theft, as Steve touched on earlier. And why is that? When you become a victim of a scam, you usually share information. It can be as simple as an email, maybe a password. You might even grant them access to your devices. You might even provide bank account numbers, and you might even provide social security. So depending on what you provide, it can become a bigger issue. So just a few tips to stay more alert and to have better practices, not only for identity theft, but also to just understand scams better and how to react to them is be alert to phishing and spoofing. Steve was great at touching at this, the differences between phishing, smishing, and vishing, and spoofing. So as Eugenia said, don't be afraid to double check. Don't be afraid to ask somebody. Slow down a little bit. Then safeguard your social security number. Don't just have it lying out. Don't have your social security card in your wallet. I know a lot of us do it. Just keep that in a safe if you can. Don't take pictures of it on a device that it might not be secure. Take the time to safeguard that valuable or invaluable number. Freeze your
And
credit.
out
Yeah.
to everyone. I mean, a
Yes.
lot of forms, I've been enrolling my kids in activities and things like that, and everybody just casually asks for it as if it's your, your phone number, and you don't have to give it out in a lot of cases. So it's worth, even if it's on the form, not just filling it out and asking, do you really need this and why? And then how are you going to safeguard it? If I give you a paper form, what are you going to do to keep track of it once you have it? So in a lot of cases, I've just not completed that section, and it's not stopped anything that I needed to have happen. So
Absolutely. And yeah, it's just another thing, and just a quick tip from experience at the way I've helped with customers dealing with identity theft is if you're calling a creditor or anybody, a financial institution to verify, ask them what else can I provide. If you don't always have to give out your social security number, there's alternatives to it. Can I give you the last four and my date of birth? Or can I give you my address, my email, my phone number? Because that social security number, it's essentially that holy grail number that once it's exposed and compromised, it leads to just a wide array of problems. So connected to safeguard your social security is freeze your credit. It's not one thing leads to the other, but the way to unlock your credit reports and view them is so your social security. So if you're not doing anything with your credit, it's always best to have it frozen or to at least have a fraud alert or some type of monitoring on your credit reports. Then also stay on top of them regularly. With COVID, the FTC has allowed everybody to pull their credit reports every 7 days. So it's a great thing to do. Make sure that you do it. Then monitor your financial and medical statements. I want to mention the medical statements because of what Steve mentioned. Once that medical identity theft happens, you're in a lot of ugly situations. So make sure to always look at your statements. It doesn't have to be every week, maybe on a monthly basis, every couple of months. Make sure you do that. Use strong passwords. And what we mean by this is don't use a street name, some type of symbol, and then numbers that are familiar to you. You want to do something that's easy to remember, but difficult to figure out. And use multi-factor authentication as much as you can. Protect your mobile device. Consider using a digital wallet so that if you lose your physical wallet or any card gets lost, you can take action quickly. Watch your mailbox. shred any sensitive documents that might contain PII, and don't just throw them in the trash. Take the time to shred them. Shredders have gotten a lot better, so take advantage of that. And then also consider enrolling in Scam Assist. That's an IRIS product. It's actually a preventative service that we have developed, and it's unique to us. It's quite revolutionary, where we help our customers identify scams before they fall victims. We can use our experts and the human element on scams, because sometimes programs, devices, and platforms can miss certain things. So we use that human element. And if you want to learn more about Scam Assist, it will be shared in the presentation. And before moving on to the next slide, before finishing up my section, I want to point out a few resources that are out there for anybody to take advantage of. Obviously, the first one is your local police station and your FBI, where you can report the incident and create a paper trail of what happened. You can file several different complaints depending on what happened. You can file one with the United States Postal Inspection Service, and they have a wide array of resources. The Federal Trade Commission and the IC3, it's a division from the FBI, if not mistaken, that allows you to submit reports for cybercrime and anything related to the internet. Now, also, the FTC has the Bureau of Consumer Protection. As I said, you can file a complaint with the FTC, and they also give you what they call a recovery plan. In this recovery plan, it gives you several different actions that you can take depending on what has happened. There's also another one. It's the Office for Victims of Crime. It offers resources for individuals, communities, and certain areas that have fallen victim of a crime. It can be for elder fraud and abuse, fraud itself, even all types of different crimes. And lastly, we also have the Anti-Phishing Working Group. It's a nonprofit organization that partners with financial institutions, the government themselves, that offers resources and research, and they have investigators for cybercrime and phishing and any type of scammers. So be sure to look at these resources, if you're curious, if something has happened, or if you just want to learn a little bit more about what's out there in case you become a victim.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for all of that great information and those awesome tips. Before we go to our Q&A section, we're going to quickly take one last poll. So to our audience out there, would you lose trust in a brand if you disclosed your personal information to a spoofed version of their website or communication? So for example, I think we probably have all gotten the fake UPS or FedEx package, your package is stuck here, you can't get it unless you click this link, or the Amazon ones, for example, your account's being disabled if you don't click here and provide some information right away. And we're curious to know, does that affect how you feel about the legitimate brand if you accidentally give that some personal information away to a scammer that's spoofing that company? I know I get these all the time. All right, about half of folks said no, close to half, but a decent amount, almost 40% said it depends. So I'd love to be able to, at some later date, unpack, what it depends on. I'd be interested and curious to know that. It probably has something to do with, how diligent the actual brand is about making the general population aware that there are scammers out there that purporting to be them. But it'd be interesting to know what others think. But now, for the sake of time, because we want to keep us on course here, I'm going to open it up to the Q&A section. So we have gotten a decent amount of questions here. So we want to try to get to as many of them as we can. This first one, Steve or Joseph, you guys can feel free. Either one of you can take this one. It says, obvious email scams often have a click here to unsubscribe link. Should I click that?
No. Joe and I are in agreement. When you've recognized that it looks dodgy, the last thing you want to do is to make any kind of contact or communication. So, there are times where I will still get things and it has unsubscribed. The easiest thing is just delete.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one here is, I keep getting Geek Squad phishing emails, but Best Buy has no address to forward them to. McAfee, PayPal, etc. all have an address to send phishing emails to. Any suggestions? That's a really good one, and I wonder if that relates to the response
The
to the last
brand. Yeah.
question about the it depends. It seems that's the Geek Squad scam emails are really, really common. So it is a little surprising and disappointing that Best Buy doesn't have an email address to address that. But related to the question, any suggestions for this person?
So I think what Steve said really can be added to this situation as well is delete it. You can block the sender. And also sometimes certain email providers will have the option to report it as phishing from within their own network. I think Outlook, we use it internally, has that option. So unfortunately, Best Buy should have that diligence of having somewhere to forward them and report them. But if you have certain email providers that have that, take advantage of the email providers and
And
their
is there a way
reporting.
to file that with the FTC, for example? Maybe if they start to get enough of them, that they can maybe put pressure on Best Buy perhaps to create a mechanism for their organization so they're at least aware of it?
You wonder with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, is very interested in these, and frankly, also all of them will have some kind of a customer service. So even if they don't have something to report a phishing email, I think it just go to the customer service. But yeah, I agree. They probably should have something, more focused. But you can still report it to them.
That's
Okay.
the way the FTC works. If you do report enough times, it causes, investigation, change, action. So it is important to report them to the FTC as well.
All right, here's the next one. I would love to understand anything more that you can share about the QR code scams, if you have it. For example, is it usually an immediate risk that I'm downloading malware as soon as I scan the code, or is it more likely to be taking them to a fraudulent landing page, for example, to do phishing?
Yeah, generally speaking, this is one I don't want to alarm too many people about. So there will be scammers who you will get a phishing email, say, or that has the QR code there. So there you do your initial evaluation. If this is something that seems dodgy, you don't want to do the QR code. The QR code generally takes you to a site, so it's not going to download the malware directly. So you don't have to be too concerned about that. But what they will do is they'll ask for personal information. And they'll ask for credit card or other financial information. And as you, Joe and Eugenia were both saying, anytime, my motto is trust me, you can't trust anyone. Anytime you're asked for any personal information or financial information, you never provide it unless you have confirmed. And so while it can be a problem, it's one that's readily avoided. As far as the restaurant goes, there are restaurants that will allow you to pay through that. I just won't do it that way. I'll just go to, I'll give a credit card to the server or bring it up to the cashier. It's just easier to avoid it.
It's a good tip. The next one we have, actually two, are more of comments than questions, but I love this, so I'm going to read them because I think it's so awesome when our participants are sharing good tips and things like that as well. The first comment is, watch out if you're involved in a real estate transaction and near the end, you get an email changing the wire instructions. And I closed on a home about 2 years ago, and I was so paranoid by the time, it came to wire the money because I had gotten so many notifications from the actual financial institution about this is the only way to wire the information. Do not take any other, email after this. Like this is, and I was so, I still called them right before I wired the money. Like this is still the right set of instructions. So again, I think just because of the nature of what I do every day, I am very much don't trust anyone, to Steve's point, and like double, triple check it, because wiring money is also very difficult to get back once it's been wired. The other comment is to shred with a cross-cut shredder, a third grader can put a straight ribbon shredding back together. And that's a great point. I can't remember where I saw it, but in the past 2 weeks, I saw that a study was just done, or an exercise was just done, where they actually had, I don't know if they were third graders, but children put that together, shredded information in a regular ribbon shredder, and they were able to do it really quickly as well. And so I think that's a great piece of advice as well.
Yeah, let me add a couple things on there quickly. You're absolutely correct, and it's one of the things I wrote about. It was they did it as a school exercise. It was third graders, 15 minutes. These kids pieced it together. So we got good people attending the webinar. Here's the thing on the real estate, and frankly, this there was a report of a man who wired funds to the scammer, $750,000. This was in Colorado just last week. This one actually had a happy ending because the bank being used by the scammer saw a red flag and froze the account, and they were able to get it. But here's the thing, that when you get that email often is because the account of the real estate agent or the mortgage broker or whomever may have been hacked. So it is coming from a legitimate source. So what you want to do is, before you ever wire anything out, you want to confirm. And let me just throw in one, it would take a lot of time, but this is a really important and simple one. People can take over your email, even if they don't know your password, by answering your security question. And all too often, the security questions that we have are things that a scammer could find. I mean, you'll have a security question of what's your mother's maiden name. So here's the thing. You use the security question, what's your mother's maiden name? But your mother's maiden name is now fire truck or grapefruit or something so totally ridiculous, no one will ever be able to know, and it's so silly you'll remember it.
That is a really great tip. That's a really great tip. Yeah.
Eugenia, just one point that I want to add, I'm so sorry, is beware for those last minute updates, especially when there's large sums of money involved. A last minute update day of is a red flag.
Yep, very good point. The next question here, if I represent a business and I suspect scammers are starting to imitate our brand or name in order to victimize people, any advice as to what steps our business should take to combat scams perpetrated using our brand? Before I open this up to Steve and Joseph, I'll just personally say, I think the biggest thing is communication, communication, communication. I think consumers, because I'm a consumer first, right? Consumers respect and appreciate being notified that, hey, there are folks out there that are trying to scam us. Please call it, and then giving them some guidance on what to do should they receive it. Please send this to us so that we can try to get take control of it or figure out a way to reduce it. Here is what we recommend you do instead of responding to this, or here's how you call us to check it, or whatever. I think that coming directly from the brand just gives a lot more credibility to the brand, because there is no way to really stop this stuff from happening. But at least if consumers see that you're at least making efforts to reduce their risk. And then, I also think it's great if you have the capability to provide identity protection to your consumers, because it is a really great way to say, should you fall victim to something like this, we care enough about your personal information as a brand to help you resolve a situation that may result of you falling victim to something like this. Sorry about that, Joseph. Steve, what about you guys?
Yeah, I agree. I think that you're absolutely correct. The communication is the most important thing, and recognize that this is going to be a problem, and so you have to be preemptive on this. Similarly, it is so easy. Before I taught at Bentley University, I taught in the state prison system in Massachusetts, and there were these old scammers who said, when I was a counterfeiter, when I was a scammer, it took skill. Now any kid with a computer can do it, and they're right. So there are times where there will be fake websites that look really, really good. Some of them, like Joe was saying, you look at the grabber and you go, please, you give criminals a bad name. You're so bad on this. But others look really, really good. And so if you really should double check. And if you're a little bit paranoid like me, what you even do is you go to a site like whois.com, which is a domain registry. You put in the URL of what seems to be the website for Target or whatever, and it'll tell you who actually owns this. And I did this live on TV once with a Walmart website. Looked perfect. And it was owned by someone in North Korea. So we had an idea, it's not Walmart.
That's actually a great tip as well. So we are very close to the end of time, so I don't want to field another question because I don't think that we will get through it before 3 o'clock, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. But before we close, I want to give a big thank you to our speakers. I think we have crammed in a ton of valuable information in the short time that we've been here, and so this makes me think that maybe we need to do another one of these at some point. But I want to thank the audience for taking the time to join us today and for their attention. And again, if you have more questions or you want additional information, our information is up on the screen. Feel free to reach out and contact us, and we will absolutely get back to you. Again, don't feel the need to jot this down. It's going to be sent to you after the webinar as well. Also, be sure if you want additional kind of tips and great advice, be sure to follow us on our social media. At Facebook, the handle is Iris ID Protection, and on LinkedIn, our company name, Iris Powered by Generali. So we're always sharing resources and tips, and we're so happy to be able to expand the audience with which we can give that information. So thank you all again for your time today, and we hope to see you at one of our next events. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.